Hi, I'm Maris. When I was 14, my mother listened to her husband and threw me out like I was nothing. No suitcase, no goodbye. Just a slammed door and silence for 10 years. Not a call, not a word. Then one day, she showed up at my penthouse, asking for the keys. Not for herself, but for the daughter she had with him. And I gave them something, an envelope. What was inside? Well, let's just say it didn't open a door. It closed one. Before we dive in, what time are you listening to this, and where from? Leave a comment below. You're not alone in this. It started with the sound of my mother's perfume. That soft, powdery scent drifting down the hallway always meant she was getting ready for bed. Usually, it comforted me, like a quiet signal that the world was safe for another night. But that evening, something in the air felt unsettled. The television murmured in the living room, the hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and somewhere beyond my half-closed door, I heard my mother's voice, low, careful, but sharp around the edges. She has to go. At first, I thought she was talking about someone else, maybe a tenant, a neighbor, even one of her friends. But then I heard my name, whispered, almost swallowed. My stomach clenched. I turned over in bed, staring at the thin shadow of her feet moving past the crack beneath my door. They stopped. Then came another voice, deeper, rougher, steady like a warning. Cassian, my stepfather. "You wanted this," he said. "Don't back out now." I sat up. The air in the room was too still. I could hear the faint clink of dishes being moved in the kitchen, the sound of a chair scraping across the floor. Then my mother's tone again, trembling this time. "She's only 14, Cass. Just a few more months." "No, you said she was making things worse." The floor creaked once more. Silence. When she opened my door, she didn't look at me the way she usually did, not as her daughter, but as if I were someone she barely recognized. "Pack a few things," she said quietly. "Just for a few days. It's better this way." I didn't understand. My backpack lay by the bed, still holding the books I'd used that afternoon at school. "Better for what?" I asked. My voice sounded small even to me. She didn't answer. Cassian stood behind her in the hallway, his arms crossed. His face was calm, too calm. He didn't have to say anything, he just waited. When I tried to step past them, he moved slightly, blocking the path. "Go on," he said. "You'll be fine. You'll figure it out." My mother's eyes darted toward him, then back to me. I could see the way her hands twisted the hem of her sleeve. She'd always done that when she was scared, but she didn't stop him. She didn't stop any of it. I packed the jeans I wore most often, my toothbrush, a sweater that smelled like our old laundry detergent, and my house key. When I reached for the keychain, my mother took it from me. "You won't need that," she murmured. That was the moment something broke, not just between us, but inside me. The key had always meant home. Without it, I was outside. I walked down the hallway, the sound of my shoes soft against the linoleum. Cassian's hand brushed the door as I passed, steady, deliberate. Then came the click, the lock. It wasn't loud, but it was final. Outside, the air felt colder than it should have for late autumn. Wilmington nights usually carried a bit of warmth from the ocean, but not that one. I walked aimlessly for a while, past the closed diner with its flickering neon sign, past the row of quiet houses that still had porch lights on. The smell of wet pavement mixed with the faint salt of the sea. I kept expecting her to call out after me, to say it was a mistake, that I could come home. But no one did. The longer I walked, the heavier my legs felt. I counted my money, $10 crumpled in my pocket. Enough for food, maybe a place to stay if I could find one. My reflection followed me in the dark store windows, small and uncertain. When the rain began, it was light at first, just mist against my skin. I looked back toward the direction of the house, the glow of the upstairs light barely visible now. I whispered, "I'll come home when you call me." But I knew she wouldn't. By the time I reached the edge of town, my shoes were soaked through. I saw a motel sign buzzing in red, Harborview Inn. The R and V flickered, making it read Ha or IEW. I almost laughed, but the sound caught in my throat. Inside, the lobby smelled of coffee and cleaning products. An older woman behind the desk looked up from a crossword puzzle. Her name tag said Junea. She took one glance at me, dripping, pale, holding my backpack like it was armor. "You lost, honey?" she asked. "Just need a room for tonight." She studied me for a second too long, then sighed softly. "You got anyone with you?" I shook my head. Her gaze softened. "How old are you?" 18, I lied. She didn't argue. She just reached for a towel and handed it across the counter. "Dry off before you catch something. There's a heater that works, mostly. Room 6. And here." She poured warm water into a paper cup, slid it toward me. "Drink this. Helps you sleep." The warmth from the cup spread through my hands, a small miracle in that cold, empty night. She didn't ask where I came from, didn't ask why my clothes were wet or why my eyes looked hollow. "You'll be fine," she said quietly. "Some of us just start life a little earlier than planned." I nodded, not trusting my voice. Inside the room, the wallpaper was peeling near the lamp. I set the cup on the table and sat on the edge of the bed. The hum of the old air unit filled the silence, soft and rhythmic, almost like breathing. I thought about the sound of that lock, the way it echoed in my chest. I wondered if my mother had paused after she turned it, or if she just walked away. That night, I stopped being a daughter. The world had pushed me out, and for the first time, I had no one waiting behind a door. But somewhere inside, under the fear and confusion, a small thought began to take shape, quiet but steady. If no one wanted me home, I'd build one myself. The rain didn't stop that night, but neither did I. The rain didn't let up for 3 days. I stayed in that small motel room, with Junea slipping in bowls of soup and warm towels, like I was a stray dog too scared to come inside. She never pushed. She didn't need to. Her silence gave me more comfort than any question ever could. When the storm finally cleared, the sky broke open with sunlight so sharp it felt like a lie. I walked down to the pier. The boards were slick from the storm, the waves still angry underneath. But I kept walking until I reached the edge and sat down. No one told me to move. No one cared. That was the first day the ocean became mine. I found work a week later at a diner just off the pier. One of those places with cracked vinyl booths and old photos of fishermen lining the walls. I wiped tables, poured coffee, and smiled when I had to. My shoes always smelled like fryer grease. My hands never stopped smelling like bleach. But the tips added up, and I stuffed every single one into a mason jar I kept under my bed back at the motel. After shifts, I'd walk down to the beach and sit near the dunes, watching the tide crawl back and forth. There was something comforting about the ocean. It didn't ask questions, didn't try to fix me. It just was. I began to believe that maybe silence could shape me the way water shapes stone. I was 15 when I stopped waiting to be rescued. 16 when I stopped checking my phone for a number that never called. By the time I turned 18, I had learned that stability came in layers. Show up early, don't talk too much, keep your head down. I worked mornings cleaning motel rooms and nights at the diner. Every towel folded, every spill wiped, every smile given when I didn't feel like it. They were bricks in a wall I was building around myself. At 22, I moved into my first apartment. It sat 3 blocks from the beach, a narrow space above a gift shop that sold wind chimes and handmade candles. I painted the walls pale blue. Built bookshelves out of driftwood I hauled in myself. Junea came by on Sundays with muffins and stories about guests she'd kicked out that week. She'd settle into my secondhand armchair and say, "You don't talk much, but you say enough." She never brought up my mother, and I never corrected her when she called me kid, even though I hadn't felt like one in years. Then, one Wednesday afternoon, it came. A plain envelope slid beneath my apartment door. No stamp, no return address, just my name, Maris, in handwriting I hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper, torn from a notebook. 4 words. "Glad you're alive. Mom." That was it. I stared at the paper for hours, held it like it might offer something more if I just waited long enough. But it didn't. There was no apology, no explanation, no request to talk or meet. Just a statement, cold and distant, like a weather report. I didn't cry. Instead, I walked to the ocean. I held the letter over the water, then folded it twice and tucked it back into my coat pocket. Letting it go felt like giving her permission to have power again. I wasn't ready to do that. Not yet. The letter didn't ruin me, but it reminded me that even ghosts can leave fingerprints. I threw myself into work. I started my own cleaning business, just a name and a phone number taped to shop windows at first, but word spread. Vacation homeowners liked that I was quiet, efficient, didn't snoop. They trusted me. By 26, I had a team of 3 women, all tougher than me in their own ways. We didn't gossip, we showed up, scrubbed, got out. I changed locks twice a year in my own place, not because I was paranoid, but because it made me feel safe. One of my new clients, a real estate guy named Hale Trent, watched me work one afternoon while he walked a buyer through a listing. Later, he caught up to me in the driveway. "You run your business like you've got a law degree and a detective license," he said, chuckling. I shrugged. "You'd be surprised what you learn when nobody's watching your back." He smiled, then handed me his card. "Let's talk. I think you've got good instincts. Might be room for something bigger." That night, I sat at my little kitchen table and stared at the card for hours. I didn't want bigger. I wanted mine. At 30, I bought a house. Not just any house. A small 2-bedroom cottage perched right on the edge of the Outer Banks. White siding, a porch swing, sea oats swaying in the breeze. It was modest, but it was mine, paid in full. The day the realtor handed me the keys, I walked through the front door alone. My hands trembled as I reached out and turned the lock from the inside. This time, I was the one doing the locking. I whispered to the empty room, "No one can take this from me again." I found a glass bowl at a thrift store that same week. Smooth, round, the color of ocean glass. I placed it by the front door, dropped the keys in with a soft clink. That sound, unlike the one from years ago, didn't close anything. It anchored me. Junea visited the following weekend. She brought wine, sat barefoot on my porch, and watched the tide roll in. "You did it," she said, raising her glass. Quietly, stubbornly. "But you did it." I nodded. But even then, sitting in the house I owned, with the ocean whispering just beyond my window, I knew peace was a fragile thing. Because peace, I learned, doesn't last when ghosts still have your address. I found the envelope on a Tuesday morning. It was tucked between a coupon flyer and a water bill. I might have missed it altogether if not for the bold red stamp, urgent. The name caught my eye first, Cassian Rowe, and just beneath it, in thinner handwriting, Vera Dean. My hand stilled. I stared at the return address for a full minute, long enough for the kettle to start whistling behind me. I turned it off without pouring the tea. It had been 10 years since I'd heard either of their names spoken aloud, much less seen them on paper. The last time my mother addressed something to me, it had been 4 words scrawled on a torn page. "Glad you're alive." Now here they were again. Names that used to mean shelter and now meant threat. I didn't open it. I carried the envelope into the living room and placed it beside the glass bowl near the front door, the same bowl that held the keys to every space I had fought for. The ocean light filtered through the window, casting a shadow across the name Cassian. I left it there, walked away. I spent the rest of the day trying to ignore its presence, but it hummed in my periphery like a high-voltage wire. That evening, I poured a glass of wine, sat on the edge of the couch, and stared it down. I told myself I was just going to glance, just see if it was a mistake, some clerical error, a misrouted letter. I tore it open. The paper inside was thick, crisp, expensive, like something you'd use for a wedding announcement or a will. There was no apology, no warm greeting, no acknowledgement of time past. Just a few paragraphs in my mother's handwriting, neat, emotionless. They had lost their home. Some real estate deal had gone bad, and Cassian's retirement funds were temporarily inaccessible. She mentioned market volatility, a contractor lawsuit. She used phrases like strategic downsizing and transitional housing. Then the line that made my breath catch. We need a place to stay by the water. You have more than enough room. No, please. No hint of regret. Just assumption. Entitlement wrapped in ink. I sat back in the chair, letting the words hang in the silence. They had thrown me out at 14 like a bag of garbage set on the curb. And now, suddenly, I was the answer to their housing crisis. Not because they missed me, not because they loved me, because I had something they wanted, again. I folded the letter, slowly, clean, sharp creases, like I was folding up the past and tucking it away. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't throw it into the fire. I just walked it back to the desk in my office, opened the drawer where I kept old motel receipts, and slid the envelope inside, right next to the one that said, "Glad you're alive." It didn't belong in the trash, it belonged in the archive, a record, a reminder. Later that night, I found myself standing in the kitchen, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the call button. My mother's number was still buried in the contacts I never cleaned out. I had it listed under Vera, never Mom. I hit the button. The line rang once, then I stopped it. No voicemail, no message. Just me, breathing into the quiet. "You'll never get to decide where I belong again," I whispered to the empty room. And I meant it. I walked out to the porch. The air was thick with salt and early summer heat. The ocean glowed silver in the moonlight, waves rolling in like they always had, steady, unbothered. I sat in the swing, pulling a blanket around my shoulders, and stayed there long enough for the sun to begin its crawl over the horizon. It wasn't just a letter, it was a warning. 2 weeks later, they showed up anyway. I was at the kitchen island, finishing up contract revisions for a new rental property near Carolina Beach. The sun had just started dipping toward the water, painting long amber streaks across the floor. My laptop hummed softly, a second glass of iced tea beside it, untouched. The house was quiet, my kind of quiet. Intentional, earned. Then came the knock, not the hollow tap of a delivery driver, not the friendly rhythm Junea used when she dropped by. This was deliberate. 3 even beats, just like the ones I remembered from a decade ago, echoing through the walls of a cheap motel room. Back when I used to pray, silence would last longer than sleep. I didn't move at first. I told myself it was nothing, but my body knew before my mind did. My stomach clenched. My hand froze halfway to the keyboard. When I opened the glass door, there they were, Vera and Cassian, my mother and the man she chose over me. Standing on my porch like this was some holiday visit, like they were neighbors stopping by with a pie. Cassian had the same smug tilt to his chin, still clean-shaven, still overdressed in that way men wear when they want to seem important. His eyes scanned the space behind me without a flicker of shame. Vera looked thinner, paler. Her hair pinned back tight, lipstick faded. She held a canvas tote like it contained something worth justifying their presence. "We didn't think you'd mind a visit," Cassian said, voice syrupy. "After all, family's family." I didn't flinch. I didn't slam the door. That would have given them something. Instead, I stepped back and held it open, an invitation not of kindness, but strategy. They stepped inside. Cassian made himself at home immediately, strolling toward the windows. "Well, look at this view," he said, hands on his hips like he'd built the place himself. "You always did love the ocean." Vera's gaze moved more slowly, taking in the space. "You've done well for yourself," she murmured, not quite compliment, not quite accusation. I looked her square in the eye. "I had to." Cassian turned, reaching into his coat pocket. He pulled out a folded paper and held it toward me like a gift. "We've had a rough few months. Thought maybe we could work something out. Just temporary, of course. I have a business partner who needs a place close to the water." I didn't take the paper. He laid it on the table, brushing off a non-existent speck of dust. "It's all above board. Wouldn't cost you a thing." My jaw ached from how tight I was holding it. I walked to the fridge, grabbed 3 bottles of water, and handed them out without a word. Vera's hand trembled slightly as she took hers. Cassian, of course, didn't notice. "Why now?" I asked, keeping my tone steady. "Why after all these years?" Vera opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked down at the bottle cap, fiddling with it like it might give her an answer. Cassian answered instead. "Because you owe your family some respect. That's what good people do." I laughed, not loud, not joyful. Just a quiet breath of disbelief that came out sharper than anything I'd said so far. And in that moment, something shifted. The girl they'd thrown out? She wasn't here anymore. The silence I used to survive them had evolved into choice, into power. "I'll think about it," I said, walking toward the door. They took the hint, slowly. Vera looked back once, eyes softer than before. I met them without blinking. She still hadn't apologized, still hadn't asked if I was okay. Cassian paused at the threshold. "We'll be nearby," he said, like it was a promise. I closed the door behind them and slid the lock shut. That sound, clean, metallic, filled the room. This time it came from my side. That night I wrote them back, not with words, but with paper that could end them. The house was quiet, except for the waves pressing gently against the shore. It was late, close to midnight, and the air carried that ocean chill that seeps through glass, no matter how tightly you close the windows. I sat at my desk, the same one I built myself from reclaimed wood during the years I learned how to live without anyone's help. Cassian's proposal lay open beside my laptop. I smoothed the paper flat, reading every line. Temporary arrangement, family courtesy, shared space. Every word reeked of entitlement dressed as civility. I opened a new document and titled it Occupancy Agreement. The words on the screen blinked back at me, waiting to become something real. Each keystroke was deliberate, steady. No anger, no shaking hands, just focus. For every line he had written to take from me, I wrote one that would tie him down. A clause about liability, a clause about property maintenance, and buried between them, one sentence, simple and quiet. The undersigned acknowledged that the property owner, Maris Dean, was previously removed from her childhood home without lawful guardianship, and that all parties accept personal accountability for prior actions in matters of custodial care. It looked harmless. It read like a legal formality. But if they signed it, they'd be admitting to something that couldn't be undone. I leaned back and stared at the screen, feeling the stillness settle in my chest. This wasn't vengeance. It was symmetry. As I printed the document, the soft hum of the machine sounded almost like breathing. I folded the pages carefully and slid them into a cream-colored envelope, the kind my mother used to send Christmas cards before she decided I didn't belong in her life anymore. On the front, I wrote, "For Cassian Rowe," and just beneath, smaller, "For Vera, if she still reads what she signs." I slipped a check inside, $5,000. Not because I owed them a thing, but because generosity disarms people like them. It makes them underestimate you. Before sealing it, I paused. A memory drifted back. Me at 14, sitting in a lawyer's office that smelled of dust and peppermint. I was too young to understand most of the words on the papers in front of me, but the lawyer had said something I'd never forgotten. Sometimes power isn't about who speaks louder, Maris. It's about who signs smarter. He was right. Back then, I didn't have the chance to sign for myself. I do now. The printer cooled beside me, and I reached for my phone. Hale Trent's number glowed on the screen. My business partner, my quiet compass in the world of contracts and deeds. I called him. "Maris, you're working late again," he said, voice soft, a little amused. "I just need a quick favor," I replied. "Look over something for me in the morning. It's personal, but legal." He hesitated for a moment. "Are you in trouble?" "No," I said. "I'm just making sure I never am." Again. When I hung up, the clock read 2:12 a.m. I sealed the envelope, pressed my thumb against the flap, and exhaled. By sunrise, I was on the road. The sky was painted in gray and coral streaks, the kind that make the world look half awake. My car hummed quietly over the bridge into town, the ocean on my right catching the first shards of light. Cassian's temporary office was in a strip plaza. Cheap glass doors, tired landscaping, a sign that said Rowe and Associates, Property Solutions. The kind of place that screams desperation hidden behind a font that wants to look important. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes and a headset, barely looked up as I entered. "Can I help you?" "I'm just dropping something off for Mr. Rowe," I said, placing the envelope neatly on the edge of the counter. She nodded. "You can leave it on his desk. He'll be in later." I walked down the narrow hallway, past framed quotes about teamwork and loyalty. One of them read, "Family is forever." I smiled, a small, humorless curve of the lips, and slid the envelope under the corner of his desk mat. As I turned to leave, the receptionist called after me. "He said you'd come." I paused, one hand on the doorframe. "Then he knows what's coming," I said, and walked out. The sun was higher now, glinting off the glass buildings, burning away the morning mist. I drove back toward the coast, windows down, hair whipping in the salt air. My hands rested steady on the wheel. I wasn't trembling. I wasn't afraid. For the first time, I felt the balance tilt, not toward forgiveness, not toward hate, but toward something cleaner, justice without noise. That night, I set the pen I'd used back into its holder, a small silver thing Junea had given me years ago, with the words, "Write your own peace," engraved on the side. Maybe I finally had. 3 days later, the envelope found its way back, unopened but heavier. The morning sun filtered through the glass walls of my penthouse, spilling across the marble floors in pale gold. I was halfway through pouring coffee when I saw it, sitting squarely on the welcome mat. Same cream paper, same seal. But it looked swollen, as if it had been handled too many times. The courier must have left it moments earlier. I could still see tire tracks in the driveway. For a long while, I just stared at it. Something in my chest tightened. That familiar sense that peace was about to cost me again. I picked it up. The weight was wrong, heavier than what I'd sent. My thumb hovered over the seal, the wax slightly cracked from travel. Then I broke it open. Inside, my contract was untouched, crisp, folded exactly as I'd sent it. But there was something new. A handwritten letter, thick paper, angular handwriting. His handwriting. Cassian never wasted words. He weaponized them. Maris, it began, you've forgotten where you came from. Everything you have, you owe to us. My pulse slowed, my body reacting before my mind did. You can't erase blood, Maris. You can't change who owns your story. I was the one who made sure you had a roof, food, and a name worth carrying. Don't pretend you built this on your own. There was no greeting, no signature flourish, just the sharp lines of arrogance carved into the paper. At the bottom, stapled to the corner, was a photocopy of my birth certificate. The ink circled one word, guardian, and under it, his name, Cassian Rowe. I stood there for several seconds, the sound of the waves muted behind the glass. The coffee pot clicked off, unnoticed. I sat at the kitchen island and read it again, slower this time. Every line was meant to sting, to rewrite the truth. 10 years ago, I was nothing to them. Disposable, inconvenient. Now suddenly I was a product of their making. I spent a decade building what they buried, I whispered to no one, and now they want to be the gardeners. The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Almost. I folded the letter, pressed it flat, and set it beside the contract. My hands were steady, but something inside me cracked. Not from weakness, but from realization. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was tactical. Cassian wasn't just trying to humiliate me. He was trying to reassert ownership. I reached for my phone and called Hale. He answered on the second ring. "Morning, Maris," he said, voice still groggy. "You okay?" "I got something in the mail," I said, calm but clipped. "From Cassian." That woke him up. "What kind of something?" I read the letter aloud, word for word. He didn't interrupt until I finished. Then came a long silence. "Maris," he finally said, voice firmer now. "That's not just arrogance. That's coercion on paper." "Go on." "He's trying to bait you into responding. Or worse, to establish some kind of legal thread, one he can pull later. Did you notice anything else in the envelope?" "There's a copy of my birth certificate," I said. "His name's under guardian." He exhaled slowly. "He's reminding you of control he no longer has." There was another pause. Then Hale's voice turned colder. "I checked something this morning. You should know. Cassian and Vera filed for bankruptcy last month, and they listed your old address as theirs." I closed my eyes, letting that sink in. "My old address," I repeated. "Yeah, your name's technically still tied to that property. If the filings stick, the creditors might come after you. That's probably his endgame. Drag you down with them." The room seemed to narrow around me, but I didn't panic. I'd been blindsided before. I knew what it felt like to drown. This time I wasn't going under. "Can we undo it?" I asked. "Yes," he said, "but it'll take proof. Dates, documents, intent." "I have all of it," I said quietly. "Every receipt, every contract, even the motel slips from when I was 14. Then we'll make it stick." When we hung up, I stayed there for a while, staring out at the water. The light had shifted. The sky was losing its morning blue, fading into something pale and watchful. I picked up Cassian's letter again, read the line he'd underlined. "You can't change who owns your story." And for the first time, I said it aloud. I already did. By nightfall, I couldn't stay inside anymore. The air felt thick, too still. I walked barefoot down the wooden steps to the beach, the sand cool against my feet. The horizon was glowing faintly, the sea moving in that rhythmic way that always made me feel both small and infinite. I carried the letter in my hand. When I reached the shoreline, I let the tide creep up, licking at the paper, blurring the ink. But I didn't release it. Not yet. "He's the reason you survived," my mother had said once, years ago. It used to echo like guilt. Now it sounded like a lie I'd outgrown. I looked out at the horizon, the the salt wind brushing my face, and whispered, "No, I'm the reason I survived." The waves answered with a hush that sounded almost like approval. By the next sunrise, I had a plan, and it started with a public invitation, not an email, not a call, something deliberate, something they couldn't ignore or twist. I sat at my desk with a blank note card and an old fountain pen that had belonged to a client who once taught me that elegance was sharper than fury. The same man Cassian once tried to impress over a charity gala steak, only to be told, "You talk too much for someone with so little to say." I took my time. Gold-trimmed cardstock, thick enough to feel expensive, clean enough to seem gracious. The heading read, "Dinner by the Ocean. Old Memories, New Beginnings." The names were hand-lettered. I didn't hire a calligrapher. This had to be mine, down to every curl of ink. I mailed 5 of them. Hale got his first. Junea's was sent directly to her office, where she'd be too curious not to come. The other 2? Investors who'd walked away from Cassian's deals years ago, but still admired him from afar. And the last? I hand-delivered that one. I drove down to their rental address, got out, and walked the envelope straight to the porch. I knocked, not out of politeness, but finality. No one answered. That was fine. I slipped it through the mail slot with a note clipped to the front. "You've always wanted a seat at my table." Then I got back in the car and drove away. 1 week later, just before sunset, the penthouse was ready. The dining room had never looked like this. White linen stretched tight across the table, napkins folded into crisp triangles, silver cutlery aligned just so. 6 place settings, 3 wine glasses each. No more, no less. I used the old silver, the same set I once cleaned every Sunday afternoon in their house while they argued about property taxes and my lack of direction. Now it was polished, gleaming under soft amber light. Hale arrived first, in a navy suit and a quiet grin. "You sure you want this public?" he asked, eyeing the second bottle of wine I'd opened. I adjusted the centerpiece, white tulips and eucalyptus. "I want witnesses," I said. Guests trickled in just after 7. Junea hugged me like she meant it, then scanned the room like she already knew what was coming. The investors followed, polite and curious. Then the elevator dinged. They were on time. Of course they were. Cassian never liked looking weak. He walked in like he still owned every room he entered, buttoned up, confident. The same smirk he wore when he signed my emancipation papers at 14, like he was doing me a favor. Vera followed. She looked smaller. Her dress was tasteful, dark, but her eyes darted. I saw the moment it hit them, when they realized the other guests weren't family. Cassian's smile wavered. "Maris," he said, opening his arms like we were mid-hug. "What a lovely surprise." "It's not a surprise," I replied, gesturing toward the table. "It's an invitation." He looked over the place settings, the wine, the people. "Looks formal," he muttered. "It is." We sat. Hale took his seat across from Vera. Junea beside me. Cassian ended up at the head of the table, because I let him. Dinner was served in courses. A private chef I'd hired plated sea bass and asparagus with lemon cream. Conversation drifted lightly between real estate, mutual acquaintances, and politics. Then came the toast. I stood, glass in hand. "Family," I began, "is a strange business. Some of us are assets. Some of us are liabilities." A ripple of polite laughter moved around the table. I smiled. But what happens when a liability invests in herself? Silence now. Cassian shifted. Vera stared down at her plate. I reached into a slim envelope by my side and pulled out a single sheet. "Cassian," I said, walking over and placing it gently in front of him. "This is a notarized confirmation that the beachfront property you're currently living in belongs entirely to Dean Coastal Holdings, LLC, my holding company. You've listed this address in your bankruptcy filings. I looked at him. Which means you've tried to attach my name to your debt. Again. His face flushed. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I turned to Vera, softer now. You'll want to read the fine print this time. She didn't look up. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the paper. The rest of the table stayed quiet. No gasps, no outrage, just watching, absorbing, the most brutal kind of judgment. Cassian leaned back. This is your idea of a family reunion. This is my idea of clarity, I said. You always wanted a seat at my table. Now you know the cost. No shouting, no tears. Just silver cutlery and fine wine and humiliation dressed in satin. The dinner ended with coffee, no dessert. When the guests left, only the three of us remained. The soft hum of the dishwasher in the distance and the ocean beyond the windows were the only sounds left behind. I didn't rush to clear the table. I wanted them to sit with the silence. Cassian tugged at his tie like it was strangling him. Vera hadn't touched her wine. She just stared at the glass as though it held an answer she'd never had the courage to ask for. I rose slowly and began collecting the plates, one by one. No noise, no commentary. I let the clink of silver be the only reply. Cassian leaned back, arms crossed, watching me. Still playing the maid? He said, half laughing, half mocking. I paused just long enough to meet his eyes. No, I said, just finishing what others always leave behind. He scoffed. You think you're better than us now, huh? Sitting up here in this glass box, surrounded by people with fancy titles. Don't forget where you came from. I set the last plate in the sink and wiped my hands on the towel before turning to face him. You didn't take me in, I said. You threw me out. His jaw tightened. I reached to the buffet and pulled out the same birth certificate he'd circled in red last week, the one he thought gave him a piece of me. I slid it across the table, where it stopped at the edge of his wine glass. Across the top was a bold red stamp, void. He picked it up, his eyes darting across the page, the confidence draining slowly from his face. I had it corrected, I said. Legally, permanently, you don't own anything with my name on it. He didn't speak, just stared at the paper like it had betrayed him. That's when Vera moved for the first time in what felt like hours. Her hands were trembling as she opened her purse and carefully pulled out a second envelope. Her voice, small and cracking, filled the space like wind through a cracked window. I didn't stop him, she said, looking down, not at me, because I was afraid. I said nothing. I wanted her to feel the weight of her own words. She looked up, eyes glistening. And now? I asked. She exhaled slowly, as though years were leaving her lungs. Now I see I was afraid of the wrong person. She placed the envelope on the table and pushed it toward me. I opened it, another bankruptcy document. This one unsigned. My forged signature printed in cheap blue ink, half dried. I couldn't let him file this, she said. I found it the morning after you sent the contract. He forged your name. Again. Cassian's chair scraped against the floor. You don't know what you're doing, he snapped, lunging toward the document. I stepped between them, calm as ice. You taught me how to survive you, I said. You just didn't think I'd ever use it. He froze when I reached for my phone and tapped the screen. A red light turned off. The app had been recording for the past hour. Hale told me to protect myself. In case things got messy, I said. I think this qualifies. Cassian stared at the phone like it had just sentenced him. We're done here. He didn't argue, didn't yell, just grabbed his coat and stormed out the door without another word. Vera stood there, alone in the space he used to fill with noise. I didn't rush her. I waited. You could have stopped him 10 years ago, I said softly, but you didn't. She nodded, her lips trembling. I know. So I did. She looked at me like she was trying to find a version of me she remembered. I didn't help her. The room was still. The ocean kept moving outside the glass. When she finally turned to leave, she hesitated in the doorway. Then she left, just as silently as she'd stayed. The door clicked shut behind her. I stood there for a moment, alone in the stillness that followed, listening to the hush that came after years of shouting, spoken or swallowed. I didn't sleep much that night, just drifted between rooms, between thoughts, until the sky outside faded from navy to silver. At some point, I made coffee I didn't drink and washed wine glasses I hadn't touched. Around 6, I finally sat down near the window, legs curled under me, letting the morning fog roll in over the waves. That's when I saw it. An envelope sat on the marble counter, just beside the sink. Pale cream. No seal. My name written in my mother's unmistakable handwriting, shaky but careful. She'd left it after I turned away. I hadn't noticed. I walked over slowly, unsure whether I wanted to open it or burn it. I took a breath, peeled it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, handwritten. The pen pressure uneven, like she'd had to pause more than once just to keep going. I don't expect you to forgive me. You were the child I couldn't protect because I was too busy pretending I was safe. If this house ever feels heavy, sell it. Don't let it become your cage the way our home was mine. I left you the necklace your father gave me, not because it's worth much, but because it was the only thing that was ever truly mine. Now it's yours. There was something else tucked inside. I gently pulled it out. A small photograph. Me, age 14, standing on the curb in front of our old house with a duffel bag at my feet. My arms were crossed, my jaw clenched, pretending not to cry. On the back, written faintly in pencil, "You were always home." I sank into the nearest stool, staring at it. I hadn't seen that picture in years. Maybe I'd never seen it at all. Maybe she had kept it hidden, just like everything else. After a long moment, I tucked the letter back into the envelope and walked to the kitchen drawer she must have opened before leaving. I found it there, wrapped in soft tissue, yellowed at the edges. A small silver locket. It felt familiar in my palm. I sat down, turned the clasp, and opened it. Inside was a photo of my father and me, taken long before Cassian ever entered the picture. I must have been 5. He had one arm around me, his smile crooked, mine toothless. It was the last memory I had of him before he passed. Behind the photo, wedged so tightly I almost missed it, was something cold and sharp. A key. I knew it instantly. It belonged to the front door of the house I was thrown out of. The same lock I'd stared at for years after I was pushed out onto the porch with nothing but that bag. I laughed softly, dry, surprised at myself. I could go back, unlock it, walk through just to prove I could. But I wouldn't. I whispered, "Not going back," and meant it. I slipped the locket around my neck and let it rest against my chest. It didn't feel heavy, just honest. Later that morning, once the sky brightened, and the mist began to lift from the sand, I made my way down to the shore. Barefoot, quiet. The tide was low, soft waves folding against my feet like old friends. I held the locket in one hand, the photograph in the other. I didn't throw anything. I didn't burn anything. I stood there, letting the wind pull my hair back, watching the horizon until the sun broke clean through the clouds. "Forgiveness isn't a gift for them," I said to no one in particular. "It's what lets me walk forward." I turned and walked back up the beach, the locket tucked inside my shirt, the photo folded gently in my pocket.